I'm
Hi.
so happy that in the middle of this global pandemic that we can have this connection. It is October 8th, 2020, and
And you
I'm Jan
are
Wurm, and I'm
yes.
so happy that Livia Stein is here with me.
So, Jan, I've known you for so long, but I don't really know about your background. I don't know what I know your work. It's fascinating and it's figurative for the most part. But what started you to become an artist? What was the force that drew you to art? Or,
I,
or what?
I, I think the actual origins were not too dissimilar from the state I'm in now, and that's isolation. And in that case, it wasn't a physical isolation so much as a social isolation. When I was 8 years old, my family left California and moved to Europe, so that I was in an environment that was not only unfamiliar, very foreign in another language, but one that was not accepting. We were living in a really little town in the Alps in Austria, uh, and I had no friends. So day after day, month after month, year after year, I would come home from school, do my homework, and then what was left in my room was drawing and my pencils, colored pencils, and my watercolors and my pastels. So that's what I did until I was 12. And then I came back to the United States. I think
Yeah,
it's all formed. It was sort of all decided. That was my language. That was what I was using to communicate and to express everything that otherwise would be shared with people.
yeah. People seem to have that insight very early on when they have that experience that that's their path. I never knew what my path at that point at 12. I never really
Yeah.
had that understanding and that knowledge. But well, being in Europe, did you go to a lot of museums and were you influenced by that at all?
I did. I did. In fact, I would say that, like a duckling, I was really imprinted very early with uh, a lot of the visual language that still is there. Uh, Very much like the way infants sort of focus on certain facial types from their families from the beginning, and then their circle of friends. I think that that happens with the art and the architecture and the environment that we're looking at when we're very young. And it was so strong there. The first trip that I made to Florence, I made when I was 9 years old. My mother was taking an art history class. And the only way she could go on her field trip from the university was to take her kids along.
Yeah.
So I just remember the strongest, greatest impact really was walking into the Accademia and seeing the Michelangelo sculptures of those slaves coming out of the rock.
Oh, yeah.
It just like it, that was it. And I think in terms of the body and presence and strength and musculature and just all of those elements, they just were, we talk about being molded. Well, I was just, put into that mold very early. And that was where I always wanted to return whenever I had a vacation from school, whether it was Easter vacation or some other holiday, we could drive there rather easily.
I was going to ask you, I know you traveled a lot in the last few years.
Yeah.
How is travel like essential to you for your practice? I mean, it's been so impacting the being there, but I was wondering if it's still, if you're more internal or you still need that external stimulus from that also, that connection.
Yeah. I don't know about um, a lot of aspects of travel the way it used to be when it was wild and unknown. It's very different now when people have cell phones and they know where they're going and they have GPS. But that wandering and the exploring and the unknown was very stimulating when I was young. And then I think it became more a passion for feeling and making a new place home. It's like living another life, being able to be in someone else's skin almost. That I would go to the same places, and I had a different wardrobe and a different suitcase for each kind of trip that I made, each place I went, and taking on the different possibilities in other languages that way, both visual and literally the language. Yeah.
It helped shape who you are, all those experiences.
It certainly sharpens your observation, I think, of others and the subtleties of how people communicate. It was very important for me because I had spent, from the very earliest years, I'd spent my days as an observer, really outside, an outsider observing.
Yes.
So all of that, I think, is essential for understanding life and also for finding a way to render it in your work. And that's what I was interested in.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was going to ask you, on your other hat, with your other hat, you've been a very successful curator, I think, and a very good writer as well. I mean, I've seen what you have written about different shows that you put on at the Richmond Arts Center and such. Good information in them. And I was just curious how that curating and working with other people's work had influenced you, or whether what it did for your own work.
Yeah. I think that's been the greatest gift, actually, at this stage of my life, to have the privilege of doing these different things that have been so meaningful for me on many different levels. And I would say that I came to curating and to writing from teaching. And I think teaching was the first step. What excited me about teaching was not the idea that I'd be imparting skills or tricks or anything to students, but that I would be imparting a way of seeing and a passion for the art that we were looking at. So it was really about the work. And that also was the foundation for curating and for writing, was to be able to illuminate and share art, the art that was really important.
I think that recently I thought of that because they have the modern, SF Modern has a retrospective of David Park. Yeah. And when you were at the Richmond Arts Center, you found a way to show a lot of his earlier work and his drawings, if I recall. And I just think that, and you did that with Diebenkorn too. You took the personal and you pushed it to the point where we could see a little bit of maybe around the corner of who that artist was in his daily life.
I think that's the advantage we have of being artists in curating and writing about art, is that we know intimately what it is to be in the studio and to be working, so that we can recognize what's going on in the artwork, and that we can also appreciate what the sketchbook, what the drawing, what the final work say to us about the whole process of thought and development that the artist has in the studio. So that was both very exciting in terms of the world and being able to share that insight, whatever insight I might have looking at the work as an artist, but also because Diebenkorn had been my teacher and because Park had been Diebenkorn's teacher,
Yeah.
it really explained a lot to me about my own work and my own process and how and why I came to the things that I valued. Yeah.
Well, it was a great gift to participate in all those things.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed the time.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. I remember at the Berkeley Arts Center when you brought a lot of artists in for interviews, people that you'd gone to school with in LA and people that you knew. It was very thrilling.
I'm always amazed at how people think of the Bay Area and LA as being separate and disconnected, and that there's so much distance between, because I remembered, as you, growing up in LA and finding that there was a lot of movement back and forth, that people who taught at Berkeley all came to UCLA, where I was, and people in LA would famously drive up to San Francisco to have breakfast. You know, they drive at night, and that you could fly on PSA for $6.20. You know, it's like, just go down to the airport.
I know, PSA with the mini skirts and the pink and orange, and it was totally, totally wonderful. That's from the early 70s.
Yes.
This is at Berkeley, yeah. So that's very interesting. What else do I want to ask you? What do you do when do you have a structure for working and for trying to get through a day's practice of work? I mean, I think it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing for older artists, particularly ones that have a bag of tricks they've been using for years, and maybe that bag of tricks isn't working as easily.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be your average day?
So that's really interesting, because I don't have an average day anymore. That's the big change for me. I did have routines. My days were all the same. If you asked me what I did for 40 years, I would just be able to give you one day and that would cover everything. And things are really different now. And they opened up and started changing about 10 years ago. So if you talk about the decade of my being in my 60s, where I was no longer just painting. I mean, for decades, all I did was I got up, I went to the easel, and I just painted all day. And now I've been working on different projects. So 10 years ago, I started working with photographs that I drew on and making books. And I thought it was like one-off project. And then a couple of years later, there was another thing that I thought was just the right medium and the way of presenting what I wanted to express. And then I did another project and another project. And before I knew it, I had a decade of that kind of work. So I was going back and forth.
Your own work, photographs that you took,
Yes, photographs that I took. Yes. So the first project was in a cemetery that I came upon that just, I was overwhelmed in this one particular cemetery, and I felt the ghosts all around me of the people who'd passed away and of the people who had been mourning them, who had also from the dates probably passed away. And so I went to that cemetery. I made three trips to it because it felt a little transgressive to be doing what I was doing. But that was my first book, was drawing all those people I was reading about in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And then I had another very strong experience going to San Quentin, and I did a book about, obviously, not the experience of San Quentin, but what it would feel like to be a visitor. That I could could work with. And
Yeah.
so I've done a number of projects like that where the photographs have all been the basis for the drawings in one way or
Oh,
another.
you make drawings of them also.
So I make drawings actually on the photographs, and then I photograph that and make the book out of that.
Oh, wonderful. It's like a different generation of
Yeah,
printing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So in that sense, in terms of rhythm and project, I'm shifting the way I'm working, from time to time. Like getting the work done, really, when you talk about this shift after you've already done 40 years of painting or 50 years of painting, and how do you maintain that same focus or commitment, and how does it have the same urgency? Because when you start out, there's an urgency to the work always. I was at a CAA conference, College Art Association conference, and this was one a few years back in LA. I went to a panel discussion that had some of the artists who are dearest to my heart. Lynn Folks was on that panel, and Chaz Garabedia was on that panel. So both were my teachers at UCLA.
Great painter.
And somebody asked Chaz about his day, like exactly the same question, in your studio. And, Chaz was in his late 70s at the time, almost 80 maybe. And he said, well, as Chaz goes, well, I find I get to the studio about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Goes, I don't know why, but it just always seems to be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think what happens is that the clock is just different for us.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of people during this shelter in place and the COVID-19 pandemic are feeling that time is also elusive.
Yes.
It doesn't flow the same way.
Yes.
But, I was so struck by that. And now I think about it. It replays all the time. I hear Chaz in my head going, well, I get to the studio about 4 o'clock.
And you find inspiration just being there to start working, perhaps, or is it a struggle to start the work?
Oh, no, it's not a struggle to start the work. It's a struggle to not let the world impede. I think there's a desperate sense that I need to take care of things now, that there's so much to take care of, that's otherwise would have been extraneous, or that you always feel you could do it later, whether it's cataloging your work, inventorying your work, labeling it, going through images, all those kinds of things, which is why I still have drawers full of boxes of slides, because I just never went through them. So there's that sort of stuff that kind of hits me in the morning. So it's a lot harder to block that now. That's what I find. Not that it's harder to get started in the studio with work, but it's harder to keep the world at bay.
Keep the world out. Yeah. Yeah. I know. And with the COVID, the world was out, but it was incredibly in at the same time. The realization that it was looming outside our studio, that we could be safe in our studio, but how safe could you really be when the world around you wasn't feeling very safe? So.
And a concern for others, because most of our friends are at high risk, and so there's that talking to them and connecting with them, and the conversations were all long and very emotional for the most part. It was a time of yeah. So, but I hope that the work is still as vibrant and vital as it was, a decade or two ago. I look at early work now with a very different view. I think when I was in the past, I wasn't very interested in work from the past. It didn't have the same value of whatever I was doing now.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, now I look at it and I see the energy, the vitality, the commitment, the optimism in it all. And that's a big change
Yeah.
to look back, which I haven't done for a long time
Yeah.
at all.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I have other things that I would ask you about particular work, but we're not there. Perhaps on another visit, we could look at work and talk to you about that in depth. But I really enjoyed it, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Livia. This has been wonderful. Bye.